the average youth, they'll live on the high of the night before until it wears off. And then they'll go, well, where's my next high? Where's my next mountaintop? Whether that's a retreat or a midweek program or whatever it is. And instead of living for the program, we need to have goalposts that say our goal is to have young people live for Christ every single day. And what's beautiful with this approach is you can use it with that youth that is attending every single thing that you do, but you can also use it with that person that's worshiping the black and white soccer ball. And I can say that because I coach soccer forever and I love it. And I'm not an enemy of the activities of our youth. I actually think we need to equip our young people to be missionaries wherever it is that God has given them a passion to do something.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for jumping on and making this podcast today part of your day, wherever you are and wherever this finds you. Thanks again for jumping on here today. Make sure you are following the show, subscribed wherever you are, wherever you listen, so you get them as they come out each and every time. Excited for today's conversation with Dr. Dave Coryell. We talk about what does it take and what does it mean to move students toward a place of kind of passive consumerism toward one where they're kind of owning things, where they're growing in maturity, reaching people where they are, moving to a place where there's real lasting impact, what that means. We jump into a bunch of that, kind of talking through his newly released book called Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees. Love the title, love the cover design. It's a great book. I hope you'll check it out. I'll have a link for it in the show notes along with anything else that we talk about today. So you're going to make sure to head over to thelongerhaul.com/episode 142 to grab all of those. So let's jump in here today with today's interview with Dr. Dave Coryell.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, here's your host, Jody Livingston.
Well, Dr. Coryell, thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule, I'm sure, to come on the show today. I'm excited for us to dive into our topic a bit. For folks who are listening, who maybe don't know you, aren't familiar with you, could you just take maybe a few minutes, explain a little bit of who you are, what you do, why the heck you're on the show today?
Yeah, you bet. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show and just thrilled to be connecting with you today and everybody that's going to be listening. And yeah, please call me Dave or DC. That's what I go by. But yeah, I've been connecting in youth ministry for a long time and served as a youth pastor, leadership development pastor for really about 15 years in the local church. I have a huge heart for the local church and youth workers of all shapes and sizes, because we all know they come in all shapes and sizes. And I love them. I love you all. I mean, you're my heroes. And then I had the opportunity to step into ministry with Christian Endeavor. And so that kind of continued my youth ministry journey. And I've been involved with CE the last 18 years. And that's on the U.S. side of the ministry, but also on the global side of the ministry. I serve as there's kind of different titles for it, but essentially like the CEO is, I guess, what we would be most familiar with that term. Internationally, it has a different term, but some kind of times called general secretary. But I connect with...
That's a way better title. That's a way better title.
But anyway, so I connect with Christian Endeavor and connecting with youth workers and pastors, parents, anyone investing in youth. I also I've been an adjunct prof at Lancaster Bible College, Capital Seminary. I've been doing that well over a decade now, and so that kind of gives me the youth group that I don't directly lead anymore, and so I love that. And I also I help out. I'm part-time helping out at a local church that just needed somebody to step in and kind of preach a couple times a month. And so I love teaching. I love just serving people and together just walking toward deeper relationship with Jesus. And so that's a little bit of that. I'm also married. We have 4 kids, one of them married, another one about to be married. So I got a bunch of young adults in my life. And so that's really awesome. I just love it.
Yeah. That's a different season of parenting, isn't it?
It is, but I keep saying, and I've said this since our kids were toddlers, every season gets better. And I firmly believe that. I run into people and they're scared to death of the next stage of beyond toddlers. And then they're scared of grade school. And then they're scared of teenage year. And they spend their whole life being scared. And we just need to dive in and invest and just build the relationships. And we're not always going to get it right, but that gives us the chance to model just asking for forgiveness and but just keep loving on them. And so, yeah, I'm loving the young adult age.
It's fun. Yeah, we're in that, but not quite as far as you. 2 in college and 1 graduating. Our youngest now is a sophomore in high school, so
okay,
we're stepping into that, and it's it's been awesome. It's been so fun, and we could get on that soapbox for sure. Like I tell parents all the time, just what you said. And don't parent out of fear. It's great. Lean in. Like every stage is different. Every stage of parenting requires a different type and level of faith, I think. Yeah. But all have been really fun. I'm loving the season we're in as well.
Awesome.
It's an expensive season. I thought they were expensive when it was diapers and formula. But no, this is way more than that. So
yeah, I agree with you there.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the book, because that's how you ended up here. Mm-hmm. I saw a lot of folks that were talking about this book and reached out to a few of them. Hey, tell me about it. And grabbed a copy. First of all, let me say, I love the cover of the book. I know that's probably not the topic, but I'm a sucker for a good book cover. And this one's super fun. If folks have been listening, they'll know I've got a book coming out in June, Lifeway, and the hardest part's writing the book. The funnest part is the cover design and picking all that stuff. And so I looked at so many different books and looking at all these different cover designs to try to figure out like, oh, I like this or I don't like that. So this is great. So thanks for that.
Yeah. And I just need to give a shout out to the team over at Fernling Creative, because they're the ones that I worked with polishing the book on the editing side and then also publishing. And they're just a fantastic team. And, we went through a whole bunch of different ideas in terms of the cover. And, I encourage everybody listening, go ahead and go out to Amazon and look at their top 100 of anything. But if you look at top 100 youth ministry new releases right now, and just look at the book covers. And I'm just so thankful for the team that I worked with. And I'm not throwing stones at anybody else, because they worked just as hard as I did at creating their book. But mine, and I'm not trying to pat our book in the back or anything, but it just looks better. And you go down through and it's like, man, I'm captured by what we have on the cover. And so I'm so thankful for the team over there at Fernling, and I give them the credit. God used them in a really cool way to help me out.
Yeah, it's super fun. The book is called Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees. You want to talk about why that title? Like, how did you end up at that idea?
Sure. Well, first of all, a hippo goes into the water for most of its day, and it comes out of the water for 6 hours, and it eats nonstop. So, if you think you've seen a lot at a pizza party at your church, I mean, forget it. 6 hours of chomping. And a hippopotamus is going to eat up to 110 pounds. I mean, average about 80, but can eat up to 110 pounds of vegetation every day. And so, this is where we get this idea of them being consumers, and their jaw opens to like 150 degrees. And so you see this big mouth, and what you think of is, here's a creature that just consumes. And I had this idea about how we treat teenagers like consumers. But quite honestly, I didn't have the honeybee piece at the beginning. I was struggling with trying to figure out what the other side of this metaphor was. A lot of times we use metaphors, and often in youth ministry we use metaphors. But we'll give one metaphor. We won't give a contrast. And I think when there's a contrast, that we actually understand the metaphor better. And so I was really trying to get a hold of that. And by God's grace, there was somebody who was actually in her teen years at the time, was the one that said, why don't you keep this in the animal kingdom? Because I think what I had gone to was like less like hippos and more like, and then I was talking like the Hoover Dam, how you can channel and generate, power and all that kind of stuff, which made sense, but the metaphor didn't work. And then she spoke into it, and I loved it. In fact, her name's Callie Sensenig, and she wrote the foreword to the book, and our editor publishers, they were like, oh, you need to have this really big name person write the foreword and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I could have asked some people to write that, but I felt like the book was going to have integrity if we had someone write the foreword that actually was impacted by what it is that this book is talking about. And so anyway, that's how the metaphor emerged. And so it's this idea, we don't want to treat young people like a consumer, inviting them to our youth ministries to sit in a chair while we as adults lead, orchestrate, run the entire program, and have them on the outside looking in, but we're happy as long as they come and fill a seat. Instead, we want to treat them like honeybees. Honeybees are incredibly creative. They're also collaborative in nature. They're able to work together with their different skill sets and make things happen. The other thing that many people don't realize about honeybees, and I learned this by talking to a youth ministry champion, and he's one of the world's most well-known youth men guys. His name's Colin Piper, and fantastic guy, so well connected, and he's from Scotland. Well, one of the things he does on the side is he keeps bees. And I learned from Colin one day, he said, oh man, I had all these bees and they were so mean. And so I had to requeen the hive. And I said, what? I was like, what is that? I said, Colin, what are you talking about? And he said, if the bees are really nasty, there's a process called requeening. And you can replace the queen with a new one. I had no idea that was even a thing. But then he went on to say that the bees will take on the character of their leader, queen. And that's when I was like, oh my goodness. Well, what we're doing in youth ministry, whether we are a parent, a coach, a youth worker, a pastor, whatever, we're trying to help young people take on the character and nature of our leader, our king bee, Jesus. And so that's the other aspect of this. So how do we help make the pivot, make the transition from treating young people like they're just these bodies to be sitting in chairs for us to count and go rah, rah in front of the church leadership team that our numbers are at a certain point, and pivot and move to a place where we are investing in young people so that they can pick up their ministry and actually be carrying it out and growing into that and impacting lives through it. So that's the essence of the metaphor.
Do you think that deep down most youth pastors want that? Like, let me I think we would all say we want that result, right? Sure. But do you think that most, and maybe it's not the youth pastor, maybe it's a senior pastor, maybe it's lay leadership, do you think that they're just content with that metric of butts in seats? Mm. Is there a desire to see students like change the narrative? Because I agree with everything you're saying. We've talked about it on the show forever. like, how do you kind of raise the bar of expectation and empower students and give away things? And I think there's two things. As you're talking, I'm like, well, I think there's some youth pastors who really like being the center of it all. It feeds the ego. It's easy. It's easier sometimes to do that, although maybe not as effective, certainly not as effective long-term. And I think there's some youth pastors that are in contexts where their leadership really just cares that there's a lot of kids in the building, because they think with kids comes families, with families comes tithing, with tithing comes, or whatever. I mean, that's maybe a shallow metric. How do you then, like, how do you change the mindset?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, Jody, it does make sense. First of all, we're held captive by our experience, and we all know that, but at the end of the day, we're all really intelligent people created by God with lots of gifts, and yet we're all capable of doing really boneheaded things. I mean, we are. And that's why I get such comfort in reading the Old Testament, because I see what the people of Israel did time and time again, that do well and then that blow it. And it kind of gives me hope in the midst of my journey, because I don't always get it right all the time. And I recognize that's okay. One of the aspects is that we, as intelligent people, we will do some things that don't make a lot of sense sometimes. And we've done that in many youth ministry settings. We've done it with an incredible heart and with amazing intentions. And so I don't want anyone to feel like a beat down is being put on them, because any investment in young people and loving them in the direction of Jesus and the kingdom is beneficial. That being said, we tend to either do youth ministry the way we've always seen it done, or we will do it totally opposite of the way that we've seen it done because we didn't feel like we had a good experience. But so much of that is based on feeling. It's not really based on a model or even a foundation that has a lot of substance to it. And so my encouragement is to people that are out there, pause and think about, what is it that's brought the motivation to do things in your church or in your family, for that matter, with young people, to develop them in a way that would allow them to go deep in their relationship with Jesus 24/7 and then live that out. And so that's my desire, is to point people in that way. I do believe people want to get there, but if they've inherited a ministry that adults have set this bar by programming at a particular level, well, there's a lot of pressure. You come in and it's like, oh, wow, is our retreat going to be as massive and great as it was last year? Is it going to be the best one ever? Are we going to have more people attend than ever? And yet, is it making a long-term impact? And so that's some of the metrics need to change, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. One of the things I appreciate about the book, by the way, is that you've kind of got two sections, right? You kind of lay out the argument in the first half, which is really helpful, setting up context. And then the back half is really practical. Like, hey, now we've talked about these things. Here's what to do. And then even in the back, like even in the appendix, hey, here's a list of ideas. Like, here's how to, like, it's not so many times, especially in the ministry context and maybe more specifically in the student ministry context, everything is really philosophical, right? It's like, oh, here's kind of a way you should think about or approach, but not like, help me implement what you're saying. Like, you could read it, come away going, I totally agree. Like, you might have a book on parent ministry and you walk away going, gosh, yes, I need to do more with parents. I've been neglecting parents. But then you're not sure like how or why or what to do. And so I really appreciate the fact that it kind of is just, it's not just this parenthetical, like philosophical change how you think about it, but no, like here's how to do it. And you kind of walk through there. You've kind of got 6 things in this back half of like kind of out, and it's under this section, like unleash the hive, right? Which is awesome. By the way, secretly, I really want to be a beekeeper. I think it's so cool. I can't, I live in the desert, but if I didn't, right? Like maybe. So there's this idea though, that you kind of pivot to on the back half of that first section of becoming a beekeeper, and then kind of how to unleash that hive. Maybe let's just take some time and talk through some practical steps. So let's say, I'll give you even a context. Let's say you're a youth minister listening, and you've just gotten there, or you're maybe 6 months in or a year in. You're following somebody else who was there before you, and you're trying to navigate how to change the culture to one that kind of empowers students and creates more lasting impact. You got 15, 20 kids coming. You've got a group of volunteers you inherited, a pastor or some leadership you're still trying to gain some favor and understand how to work with. Like, where do you start? Does that make sense? Is that too specific? Like, how would you begin to change that culture and kill some of those sacred cows and move to this place of health?
Yeah, that's a beautiful, and it's a generous question. I need to give a little context before I launch into it. So the book has 2 sections. You're right. The book that I gave to the publisher, actually had 3 sections. And the 3rd section it hasn't come out yet. It's actually going to come out February 3rd. And it's going to be a devotional companion. And I'm not saying this in any way because I'm trying to market this. I'm just explaining what it is that was going on. My heart when I wrote this was I wanted to provide the theory. I wanted to provide the practical. But I have also walked in the shoes as a youth worker. And I've been doing this a long time. And I know how challenging the journey is. Even as you're trying to do the things that you know are for the good of the kingdom, and even for the good of the spiritual health of youth and families, you can still get beat up repeatedly. And you get beat up by people that they're not even thinking, and they're beating you up. And because of that, I wrote the 3rd section, and it's going to be called Beekeeper's Devotional. And it's essentially 15 really solid stories with a deep dive into Scripture to just encourage the heart of the youth worker. So understand that is the whole picture of what I wrote. And I went back and forth with the editor-publisher, and they were like, Dave, these first 2 sections are so focused. And your 3rd section is so focused. If you put it all together, the average reader is not going to have the focus. And so I finally relented, and I said, okay, but my heart is for every one of you that's listening out there, not to take any of this information in this book and go, oh man, this is going to be hard. I'm going to get beat up while I'm trying to do this. Well, of course, if we're trying to do kingdom work, it's going to be hard. But that doesn't mean we shy away from it and that we don't do it. We have to do the hard stuff. So anyway, that's a little bit of foundation. Having said that, now connect me again with the question that you asked, because I want to make sure I dive into that.
I'd love to speak more specifically to the context of somebody who's listening, right? And so I made up a scenario of you've got somebody who's 6 months to a year in, pretty new, following somebody before. There's some sacred cows there. You've got a group of volunteers you inherited, some kids who are still trying to figure out if they like you, but they still miss the other person. Everything you do is compared to the last youth minister, your senior pastor, your leadership. You're trying to figure out how to work together still, what's expected. Where do you begin then to make this shift, if you will, assuming that you kind of stepped into an atmosphere of more hippo, right?
Yep.
And you're wanting to kind of move more into this honeybee idea. where you're empowering students? Like, where do you start in a way that you don't get fired?
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Like, cause we've all seen it. You come back from a youth ministry conference and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this. You're like, no, we're not. We're going to look for someone else.
Yeah. 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 You can only make change in any setting, in any organism, based on the level of relationship that you have established in that setting. And so I can't give an answer that's going to be 100% perfect across the board, because one person is going to take this and want to implement it, and they haven't nurtured relationship. The other piece is that someone might have certain relationships but not others, and that's that's something that I wrote a little bit on a while ago. Never published anything on it, but it's like there's so many different levels of relationship in youth ministry. You, of course, with the youth and the parents and caregivers, but then there's also all of those leadership levels in your churches, and yet you're dating those people too, and especially younger youth workers that are in their first maybe 3 to 5 to 7 years of being involved in youth ministry. I mean, you're learning that oftentimes the school of hard knocks. It's like you got to build relationships with the levels of leadership in the church, because you're functioning underneath a bigger umbrella than just the youth ministry. So where I start, and where I have started and where I would continue to start, if I started in a church today and I was brand new in that church, I would start the same way that I started any of the other previous places I served. And that is, I would lay down a prayer foundation to the ministry. And I would make sure that I had a group of people that were praying for me regularly. And I do that to this day. I started that when I was first starting out in youth ministry. And now that I'm the age I am, 54, and I'm serving with a global youth ministry, I send out a prayer update every other week. And I let people know where I'm going to be and who I'm going to be talking with, and what it is that they can be praying about. And then 2 weeks later, I give them an update on what's happening. And then I ask them to keep praying. And so I would say the same thing. I would start there. And then my next step, and this is whether, I served one church that it was a smaller youth group, and it grew a little larger. And then I was at another church. It had kind of a medium-sized youth group, and it ended up growing really, really pretty large. And it didn't matter. I worked with someone. I found volunteers and just prayed into that, and God provided them. And we made sure every single youth, whether or not they were attending every week or whether they were there twice a year, we would connect a youth with an adult to pray for them. And we'd do these things where we'd set up little bookmarkers, and here's their interests and here's all this kind of stuff, and and email them out or hand them out or whatever. But we just had a priority that we were going to passionately pray over every single student. And then I had a framework that each day of the week I had certain grades that I was praying for certain students, and had others that joined me in that. And I would start the same way. I would do that, and I would have a strong relational connection strategy in place for how I was connecting with every one of the youth underneath my care, as well as their parents or caregivers. These are strategic pieces that youth workers need to be intentional about if they want to really see deep change in people's lives. If you're doing those things and you lay the less like hippos, more like honeybees strategy on top of it, you will see change, and you will see it in a way that you never fathomed you could see. But if you try to implement this and you don't have a prayer strategy, and you aren't investing in going deeper yourself in your relationship with God, and you aren't working on relationships, well, it's not going to matter what strategy you try to use, because you need those things.
It's very similar to I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tony Sauter. Tony Sauter has a ministry called the Pray For Me campaign. It's very similar. It's Tony's good friend, been on the show. But you're talking about that prayer connect, and specifically for Tony, what he's trying to do in the Pray For Me campaign is to kind of even get some of this, maybe the older senior adults engaging generationally down by praying for those students and making sure that they're connected. That's great. That's great. I think in a larger context, maybe you can't connect with every student, but it's important that you have someone connecting with every student. It just depends. Like that relational piece can't be overlooked. Every student should be connecting with an adult. And that, again, context is going to matter and what that looks like, but the importance of that, and I totally agree.
Yeah,
you mentioned,
absolutely.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you're in a smaller church out there and you've got a handful of students, your ability to relate to each one of them is of course much easier than having a larger church. But I would encourage you, even in a smaller church, to really try to nurture some other adults, because you're only going to be able to reach the youth that you have the most common dynamics, that you connect with them most often. And so doing that even in a small church context is important. But yeah, what I did when I was in a larger church, and when I say larger, I was in a mid-sized church for a number of years. It was about 400 people in worship attendance, and so we started off and we had about 25 youth, and they weren't all active. Some of them were kind of just like, kind of snoozing their way through Sunday school kind of thing. But then God kind of grabbed a hold of it. And before you knew it, it was like 6 times the size of that. And what I did at that point is I had a personal commitment that I wanted every youth to know that they were loved. And I didn't want any one youth to say, oh, Dave favors that group. And so now I know I'm type A and all that kind of stuff, but I was like, 3 times a year we surveyed the student body, and we found out what are their activities that they're in, what do they have going on, and all that kind of stuff. And man, I laid out the schematics, and yeah, we had adults that were like the closer connection to groups of students than me, because there was too many of them. But you better believe that I was on campus and I was watching the sporting events or the concerts or the, whatever things were shaken down for every single student, unless like they went MIA and wouldn't give me any data, and then that was another thing. But yeah, there's ways to be intentional and strategize those things so people know that they matter.
Yeah, and presence matters so much, right? And you can get so caught up back to even the kind of what we were talking about earlier, even with the metrics. You can get really caught up in your program, and get really caught up in your events, and you forget. And those are a piece of the puzzle, but they can't be the whole thing, because if that's the sole focus, you're undercutting everything you're trying to accomplish, because it's a flash in the pan, but it's not. You're not really cooking anything, Okay, you mentioned kind of the strategy, the Hippos to Honeybees strategy. You want to walk through what would that look like really quickly? What would you say if you had to kind of summarize that strategy?
Yeah, if I'm summarizing it, first of all, I mean, you need to take a step back and you need to examine your zoo. And now I don't use that language in the book per se. But that's actually language. We have a starter kit, and it's actually a kit designed to help you make the transition from having a hippo factory to having a honeybee hive, and an incubator of impact, as we call it. And so you got to examine your zoo. You got to take a look at your youth ministry and go, wow, well, what are we doing here? Are we actually developing young people as hippos by just giving them opportunities to consume? And that's even if they're consuming good things. So if you consume too much of a good thing, you will still just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I am a huge proponent of studying God's word and prayer and, the habits that we need to carry out as believers. But I'm also a proponent of the habits that are active, serving and sharing, worshiping, those kind of things. So anyway, so you examine your zoo and you take a look at, hey, what are we doing with this? A next piece of this is something that I believe is key. So in Deuteronomy 6, we see something, and this passage, this has been kicked around in churches for the longest of times, and we touch on it, but it's like we skim stones on it, and we don't dive deeper. So what we have to recognize is that God's people were hanging out in Egypt in slavery, and it was 400 years that they're down there. And this is the part that most of us have studied and most of us know. But then God, through Moses, brings them out of Egypt. Now, the challenge is they are out of Egypt, but you can see in their behaviors that God still had to get the Egypt that had been beat down inside of them into their system. He had to get that out of them. And so Egypt was still in their hearts, even though they had left the country. And so what he did, because he knew his people, he loved them, but he knew they were forgetful. And so he had to make it simple. And he made it incredibly simple. He said, you just have to remember these key ideas. And then here's how you'll remember those ideas. And he explained what they had to do. So it's like, okay, you gotta love me above everything else. And you gotta love me with everything. Now, in order to remember that, impress it upon your heart, impress it upon your kids, and then talk about this when you get up and when you lie down, when you walk along the road, and tie them as symbols, which seems a little weird for us because culturally it doesn't make sense, but it's like tie them upon your hands and your head, and even put them on your door frames so that you remember these simple ideas. And, I ask youth workers, I ask pastors, and I've asked this question all around the globe. I've had the opportunity to teach with people in 6 continents and like 50 countries. And I go into these different places and I never run into somebody that says they found a way to simplify what it is that a young person is supposed to do so that they remember it every single day and live it out with some level of accountability. And so the Hippos to Honeybees process, which connects directly into the ministry that I love and I serve, Christian Endeavor. It's a process that it just does this. And it uses a simple promise that young people can be instructed in so that youth aren't just told, hey, go pray and read your Bible, but they're actually given something that they can focus in on and go, okay, this is what I'm trying to live out today. And then at nighttime, they can look at it again or remember it again and go, how did I do? And then periodically with their peers in the youth ministry to be challenged to say, how's that going? Are we living like hippos? Are we living like honeybees? Are you living out the promise? And to actually wade into that and say, here's how I'm doing. Here's where it's going well. Here's where I need some encouragement. So that's really the next step of the process. It looked like you were itching to dig in.
No,
Jody.
it's great. I just was thinking like the idea of simplifying that and that promise, right? Is that promise consistent across the board? Does that change in every context? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So that promise, which, I mean, it's a simple statement. I can rattle it off for you if you want me to, but we've actually translated it into 42 different languages. So there's people using it all around the globe. And that's one of the things that knits us together as a global movement and network is there's this piece that we know we're trying to instill into the hearts of youth. And those youth that grab a hold of it, they're the ones that we launch into and engage and turn ministry over to.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that a certain church couldn't take that promise and adjust it. We have such great flexibility with that because Christian Endeavor is a movement. The whole concept of the Honeybees initiative, the Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees initiative is it's kind of a movement. And if you pick up this idea, it's not like we're going to be looking over your shoulder and wagging our finger at you if you don't use the exact phrase that we use. But the idea is, how are we helping young people commit to Christ 24/7? Not just trying to create a great youth program. We create a youth program, and then so they come to your Wednesday night. Now, I know your program might be Wednesday night, Friday night, Sunday night, whatever, but let's just say for a minute it's Wednesday night. And you have the most powerful Wednesday night in the history of youth ministry. I mean, God shows up in a powerful way, and you're blown away. God does more in that time than you ever thought he could do. The next morning, Thursday morning, the youth that were at your event, they've got to wake up and they've got to get into it. And have you equip them even a little bit to say, oh, this is what I'm supposed to live out today. The average youth, they'll live on the high of the night before until it wears off. And then they'll go, well, where's my next high? Where's my next mountaintop? Whether that's a retreat or a midweek program or whatever it is. And instead of living for the program, we need to have goalposts that say our goal is to have young people live for Christ every single day. And what's beautiful with this approach is you can use it with that youth that is attending every single thing that you do, but you can also use it with that person that's worshiping the black and white soccer ball. And I can say that because I coach soccer forever, and I love it. And I'm not an enemy of the activities of our youth. I actually think we need to equip our young people to be missionaries wherever it is that God has given them a passion to do something. Yeah. But that might mean we need to use different methods to connect with them outside of regular times to give them that equipping. But all this to say, you only go after that if your goalpost is 24/7 running after Christ in the life of every youth that is under your care. So that,
I think you got to be clear in what you're aiming at, right? Or you hit nothing.
Yeah.
So in the back half, you've got kind of four really: invest, champion, empower, and motivate. Yeah. Right. Kind of this progression that walks through that, and then there's chapter 11 is time for reform, and then 12 is kind of reflect and act, which I love the way that spells out and kind of walks through. Do you think that one of these is more difficult than the other?
Yeah.
Like, which one is the most challenging? Do you see? Because I think, here's what I'm thinking to give you some context for what I'm asking. Like, maybe investing sounds good, championing sounds, but is there a spot where if I'm walking through this, you see youth pastors kind of get more hung up than others where, this one's pretty hard. I need to know when I get to that one, I got to push through a little bit.
Yeah. I would say the one that youth workers do the best, at least most of the ones that have had a little bit of training and have had enough time to understand what this whole youth ministry journey is about, is that they understand they have to invest. And so they're building relationships and they're doing that. But many of them, and probably many people listening to this podcast, are going, man, I'm investing, but why am I not seeing this release of just God's impact in the lives of these youth? And there's actually a Venn diagram in the book that we use with this chapter 8, 9, and 10 with champion, empower, and motivate. And so each one of those has the circle, and where it overlaps in the center, all three of these overlapping is impact. And now we have to be careful. We throw around impact like a hot potato in churches. It's like we almost worship it. You know, I've heard one person call it the idolatry of impact. So we have to be careful that we're not worshiping the impact, but when walking through in a healthy and godly way, we're looking to see young people just be unleashed to make a difference for Christ through their lives as he's making a deep difference in their life. And so that's the essence there. But to answer your question, the one that's the most difficult, I think, is empower. And the reason why that's the most difficult is because we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, Jody, I need to tell you, I'm part of a group. It's called the Next Gen Global Youth Leaders Collab, and there's just like 25 of us that represent a bunch of global networks that are looking to impact lives, impact youth. Most of them much bigger than Christian Endeavor. So most of these are like groups that actually groups like Christian Endeavor can connect to. But they actually got all these groups together and they're having this collab, and we've been meeting a couple years. We had the longest debate to the point where I was losing the will to live in the midst of this meeting. And it's not because they aren't great people. They're all fantastic people. They're amazing servants of God. And I'm blessed to be connected with them. But we were having this wordsmithing process on the word empower. And I'm telling you that we could not come to an agreement on what it is this word was and whether or not it should even be included. It was, if you had videotaped this, it would have almost been comical to show it. And because here are the people that every one of them would have said, we want to empower youth. And you can see this as slogans all over the place, used all kinds of different places. In fact, even in Christian Endeavor, you'll see us using it. You know, empower youth in ministry. Now we have definition behind it that we're trying to operate off of. But the reason why this is tough, people think if they're championing that they are empowering. They think if they're motivating that they're empowering. But really those are individual items of themselves. And so that's why understanding these three different buckets and what they are individually, and then if you're investing in each of those three areas, you can see this incredible unleashing in young people. And it's just been exciting to see people's eyes light up because they recognize that there's just been a gap in their investment. And so that's where, as I wrote it, I started the second half of the book with invest. But now let's see where there are some gaps in our investment so we can fill in those gaps, and then we can see young people just go.
If you were to define champion, empower, motivate, how would you define each of those?
Yeah, it's much harder to define them in words than it is with pictures. Yeah. And that was another adjustment that was made in this book. I had these personalities. It's almost like you walk into a zoo and you'd meet 9 people. Uh-huh. And then there were 3 people with each one of these words. And that got scrapped because I was told I was mixing my metaphors. And I'm like, oh man, I have so much fun with metaphors. But you know, to put it in layman's terms, I think if I'm a champion, I am wading into the water and I am doing whatever I can to cheer on and open doors so that way people that I'm investing my lives in have the opportunity to step into something. Now, Now, when I say that, somebody could say, "Oh, you're taking care of all the hard stuff for them, and you're not making it hard enough." And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that you're doing everything for somebody, but what I'm saying is that you, as someone that has been positioned to mentor the young people under your care, and you hear about a talent or a gift that a young person has, then you need to be asking yourself, do you know someone that you can introduce them to? That doesn't mean that you're doing everything for them, but you're opening a door. You're given an opportunity. And I can think of so many of those that people did for me along the way. And I didn't realize what they were doing, that they were being a champion for me, but they were. Now, another part of that is that we just need to be encouraged. You could be a fantastic youth worker, so much better than average. All right. If you find out the average youth worker, you will so surpass the average youth worker if you just make up your mind that you are going to consistently be a voice of encouragement in the lives of the youth and parents, caregivers in your churches. Absolutely. And yeah, you reach out. I could tell so many stories about this, but I remember one time I wrote a note to a parent because I had seen something really cool that her daughter had done, this one family. And so I sent this note. The next week, this lady walks up to me in church and she's like, "I want to thank you for the note." And then she couldn't get out the rest of the phrase because she was just sobbing. And here there are all kinds of things shaken down at home that I wasn't aware about. And all they had seen were negative things. And I was a voice of positivity in the midst of that.
Yeah.
So to be a champion, yeah, it's to do those things. Stand in that gap of the negativity of the world and the voice of discouragement that comes from the world, and open doors and cheer them on, and do it with intentionality and just really invest in doing that. So that's champion. With empower. So empower, it's passing on skills and abilities, but doing that in a way that uses as much active learning as you possibly can. Young people are just wired to do, and even more so this generation than previous generations, because they're constantly creating content, and yet they walk into youth ministries where everything is done for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so to empower them is to actually give them an opportunity to work on different skills and abilities, but we do that with active opportunities. And so that's really this idea of empower. We think we've empowered if we have taught something. And if that teaching was passive, meaning that it was passive for the learner, so they sat and they heard it, we're making an assumption that we have empowered, where really all that we've done is we've tried to communicate. And so we need to move our understanding of empowerment to a reception of ideas that they begin to use and have opportunities to use. And so we do that in many different ways in the midst of our homes, in the midst of our ministries, and so that's the empower area summarized for you. With motivate, that's where you need to understand that there's different types of people. I mean, there are some people that their motivational style is stick a carrot on the end of a stick and say, "Hey, run after this." And I was that kind of kid. I was that kind of youth. If there was a competition to be won and somebody put the carrot out there, man, I was going to go after it, and I was going to go after it hard. And that's how I'm wired, but that's not how everybody's wired. And so So some people are wired that you got to insert your size 10 into their rear end. Now, obviously, you gotta know how to do that appropriately, and that's not how everybody's wired either. So if you try to give everybody the kick in the butt, some people will be like, "Oh man, this guy's hardcore. I'm out," and then you're wondering why everybody's leaving you. So that's where having this understanding of the young people that you're serving. And that takes me back to what I said at the beginning. You need to invest relationally, because if you just take this model and you put it down and you haven't built relationships, then you're going to try to apply things that could get you into trouble. But if you know your young people and you know their families, then you can begin to invest in them to motivate them. So what we've done in a lot of settings, we try to empower by passing on skills and abilities. We try to champion by giving open doors, by encouraging, and then we don't apply appropriate motivation. So you can quickly see how if you influence one of these three areas or two of these three areas, you still might be stuck.
Yeah.
But if you consistently invest in all three, then all of a sudden you begin to see things go.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, if folks wanted to connect with you kind of outside of this, obviously they can go get the book, which I would highly recommend. I'll make sure there's a link for the book in the show notes. Beyond that, what's the easiest way for folks to connect with you?
Yeah, well, DaveCoryell.com. I have a website. They can also find me on Instagram and on Facebook. Those are the two primary ones I use. I also have a LinkedIn one. I got going with that one because of the book, and so I'm slowly getting that one going. But that's a way you can connect with me. If you if you forget my name and you just do a search on Christian Endeavor, you'll find Christian Endeavor. You'll be able to find a staff page and connect with me. So those are all ways that you can certainly reach out and connect.
That's great. I'll put links for all of those in the show notes as well for folks to grab. Man, thank you so much again for time. Thanks for the book. I know it's going to be helpful for so many. It was encouraging for me to read, challenging for me to read. Again, I know how much work goes into that. It doesn't just happen. And so thanks for investing in youth workers and in students for sure. I appreciate it. You probably don't get told that enough, but I will tell you, I appreciate the difference and the impact you're making on that front.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the encouragement, and just thanks for the opportunity to be on the show and to just to try to encourage everybody that's out there. Together by God's grace, we make an impact one life at a time, and so I'm just hopeful that something that we talked about today could encourage you in the journey. And I hope the book, if you choose to pick it up, I hope it can encourage you and maybe some of your parents, or maybe even some of the leaders at your churches. Maybe some of them will read it as well, because if they grab a hold of the idea that your churches are to really be incubators of impact as you think about young people, it's gonna turn over your whole church in a positive way, and it'll be such an encouragement to all of you. And so I hope that happens.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks again. I'm sure we'll keep in touch, and we'll catch you later.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Well, there you have it. A great conversation with Dave there. Appreciate, again, his time for coming on. A busy guy for sure. I hope you'll check out the book. Good. Just a great book for you. There'll be a link to that in the show notes, along with all the other things we talked about. That's at thelongerhaul.com/episode 142. thelongerhaul.com/episode 142 will be where you'll find all of those things. Hey, thanks again for listening today. We will catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast. Before you go, hit that subscribe button to keep these conversations coming. For notes, resources, and to join our community, swing by thelongerhaul.com. Stay encouraged, keep making a difference, and remember, we're in this for the longer haul. Catch you on the next episode.